Hello, and welcome to this event on preventing chronic absenteeism with data-driven MTSS practices. Today's webinar is sponsored by Renaissance and produced by SmartBrief. My name is Scott Becker, and I'm here as your moderator from SmartBrief, and I've got a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of today's great session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a PDF in there, which has today's slide deck. So feel free to grab that resource at any time during the presentation as a nice reference for the discussion today. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. And so to get us started, I'd like to bring in Daisy from Renaissance, who's going to act as the host for the presentation. Daisy, welcome, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Scott, and welcome everyone. I'm Daisy Kratz, and I'll be your Renaissance host today. We want to welcome you to our webinar on preventing chronic absenteeism with data-driven MTSS practices. As Scott mentioned, this webinar is sponsored by Renaissance, where our mission is to accelerate learning for all students all around the world. And we do this by providing an ecosystem of connected products with solutions for accurate assessment, like FastBridge and STAR, purposeful practice and instruction, such as Freckle, Myon, and Nearpod, and actionable insights using EduClimber, our MTSS management platform, which you'll hear a little bit more about today. To learn more, you can visit our website at renaissance.com or give us a call at the number listed on your screen. So today's conversation is centered around preventing chronic absenteeism, thinking through data-driven MTSS practices, and I'm excited to be joined by two experts in the field. Kelly Kildee is our MTSS advisor here at Renaissance. She helps provide guidance for implementing MTSS in a school setting. Prior to her work here at Renaissance, she was an educator for 20 years. She served as special ed teacher, an intervention specialist, as well as dean of students. We are also being joined today by Dr. Sarah Brown, president of System Impact Consulting, and a national MTSS consultant and author. Prior to her experiences, she held the roles of Senior Director of MTSS Solutions here at Renaissance, as well as Bureau Chief at the Iowa Department of Education. She also is co-author of the book, Effective Universal Instruction, an action-oriented approach to improving Tier 1. So welcome, Kelly and Sarah. I know we are looking forward to this discussion about such an important topic. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah, to get us started.
Thank you, Daisy. Welcome to everyone joining us today. We're going to spend the vast majority of our time, of our hour together, really digging into data, and then also solutions to improve attendance in school. But we also want to make sure that we're all on the same page as we speak about absenteeism. So we're going to spend just a bit of time focused on what we mean when we think about chronic absenteeism. When we look at chronic absenteeism, we know that, that we're really thinking about students who are missing 10% or more of school days for any reason. So that typically equates to about 2 days a month when you think about, as we're thinking about students who are at risk. of chronic absenteeism. And we found sharp increases since the pandemic. There were many districts who had issues with attendance prior to the pandemic, but you can see rates of chronic absenteeism almost doubled from 2018-19 school year to the 21-22 school year. And so we're seeing, I know districts that I go to around the country regularly talk to me about concerns about attendance. And I'm guessing that's why you chose to be here today in such a busy month of June in schools. And as we think about that, and we know attendance is really important in schools. Students who are chronically absent not only have impacts to their day-to-day academic functioning in school today and this year, but it also has long-lasting impacts and it is predictive of other things such as dropping out. And so what we know is when students aren't in school, they can't benefit from the high-quality Tier 1 instruction, the instruction that we're providing to all students. The work of your important classroom teachers that's being done can't be benefited from when students aren't in school. We know from Attendance Works and their fantastic work that they do through that organization that there are several causes of chronic absenteeism. So we know the reasons students are absent. Some students have barriers to attendance. They struggle to get to school because it's hard to get to school. Others may have an aversion to school, and so it's something that they're avoiding. Some families and students might have misconceptions about the importance of daily attendance. And especially after the pandemic, we have students who are just disengaged from school, which makes it hard to prioritize and get back into that rhythm of attending school every single day. Because we know these root causes to chronic absenteeism, a multi-tiered system of support is a fantastic framework to address attendance barriers. Knowing those specific causes and then using our data can really help us to improve attendance on a day-to-day basis. So let's dive into what we mean by a multi-tiered system of support. A multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, is really designed to be a multi-leveled system of support that's a prevention framework that's designed to use data to support schools to use their resources best to address both student needs as well as educator needs in order to be able to meet those student needs. Because that's what our teachers are trying to do. So we want to support them to do that. And MTSS is a fantastic way to help with that. This pyramid itself contains the resources at our school. It's a variety of resources. When we think about Tier 1, I want you to think about those prevention-focused things that we do. It's the high-quality classroom instruction, those pieces that we put into our framework to support attendance on a day-by-day basis that all students receive. And it can be refined by local context and needs. So the things that you might need to do in your school to get all students to attend every day might be different than a school district down the street and a community next door. And so we have to think about our local context and our data as we set those things aside and as we determine those needs. When we think about tiers 2 and 3, we're really talking about standardized and targeted interventions, typically at the tier 2 area, and then at tier 3, more intensive individualized supports. So as students' needs become more intensive and individualized, our resources that we provide to help them, to support them to come to school every day also need to become more intensive or individualized. And these are intended to be in addition to those tier 1 resources that we provide to all students every day that we just have built into our school culture in order to support regular school attendance. And so this MTSS is definitely intended to be at first and foremost a prevention framework, because we know that the best way to promote daily attendance is to get ahead of it and not let students become chronically absent. It's hard once students haven't been attending school to get on the train to attending school every single day, right? And so we have to make sure we know that we can prevent problems more easily than we can fix attendance problems in the long run. And as you think about this MTSS as a prevention framework, I want you to think about this pyramid then of MTSS as containing the resources in your school. So as we talk today, we're going to give several ideas of potential solutions to improve attendance and ways that you can support and promote attendance within your building. But this pyramid is a piece of that. I want you to think of all of those resources that it takes to do that as being part of that pyramid. Many of us think about MTSS as a way to provide intervention to students, or some districts might use it primarily as a way to support child find practices. But this MTSS can really serve your district in many ways. And this pyramid is showing the resources is one way to think about that. So when we say that, we mean there aren't really tier 2 students, there aren't red students. There are students who are benefiting from tier 2 resources, or students who are accessing tier 3 resources. And that does something, it may seem like a small shift in semantics, but it can make a big difference in the way that we think about working within our school. So if we think about our pyramid as containing students, then sometimes a few things can happen. One, we might become really resigned to the fact that some students will always have low attendance or a high number of absences, and expect that some students will be chronically absent, because we start to expect and accept that some students are at risk of failure. We see students who are receiving tier 2, we say, oh, here are red students. It's okay that they are absent because they were already red. When in reality, the idea is that those resources that are intensive are promoting greater attendance and are improving attendance. Another thing that can happen if we think about the pyramid as containing students instead of resources is that we can go straight to interventions being the solution to a high number of students who have absences, as opposed to taking a step back and realizing that the vast majority of our resources are always in tier 1. And so when we think about impacting and really driving improvements to attendance, focusing on tier 1 first can make a really big effort. So we're going to focus today on the idea that this MTSS framework can really drive efforts to promote daily attendance for all students and provide teams with the infrastructure and support that they need to improve attendance for all students who are struggling to attend school every day. And one way that this framework does it is by supporting teams. So if you use a team approach to supporting attendance, many schools will have an attendance team whose job it is to drive improved attendance and prevent chronic absenteeism. And they're able to use their data throughout the year to do that. So they can use their data to identify potential concerns before they become big problems for both grade levels, individuals within the school, as well as for individual students. They can help your school identify and support those tiered supports that we will talk about and provide some ideas for today. They can also support educators to implement tier 1 attendance strategies so that we're doing things proactively to prevent and boost attendance right from the beginning. And then they can help us match tier 2 and tier 3 resources. So those attendance teams can be a great way to use data to really drive improved attendance and support for students who are struggling to attend school every day. And so we're going to dig into some of the data that those teams might use. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to discuss some of the ways that teams might use attendance data.
Thanks. So as Dr. Brown mentioned, using data to identify potential chronic absenteeism concerns will drive improved attendance and prevent future issues. So let's take a look at some best practices for supporting student attendance within an MTSS. First, we're going to talk about creating that practice that begins with organizing and facilitating that school-wide attendance strategy team. This team has an inquiry-based mindset, and it's an integral component of a school's plan to improve outcomes for all students. This team is typically led by your principal, but it also involves other members of the building, such as your school leaders, your nurse, counselor, social workers, your administrative assistants, special education team, teachers, early education teams, as well as expanded team members. So having this team together, when they meet, they get together at least monthly to quickly identify needs. And at the start of the school year, they may meet a bit more. During the year, if chronic absenteeism exceeds 10%, the team should meet weekly to review the school's attendance data and coordinate school-wide efforts so they can reduce the chronic absenteeism of those students. Additionally, the team should really focus on ensuring that there's time to review and monitor the overall district's attendance strategy so that the team doesn't become overly focused on individual students with the highest level of student need. So after the attendance strategy team has been established, this team is then going to use actionable data to support their decisions and their initiatives, as well as how to allocate the resources. So what is actionable data? It means that the teams are collecting and reporting out on that absent data. And it also means that they have in place a way to the protocols so that they can ensure that the data is collected correctly and timely and routinely for all students. So analyzing both the quantitative and qualitative data is going to drive the supports for individual students as well as specific student groups for having those equitable outcomes and opportunities. So in doing so, districts are going to be able to dive deeper into their understanding of those attendance barriers, and that will support those inclusive problem-solving practices and approaches towards those attendance issues. So overall, that analysis, it focuses not only on just when students are absent, but it's going to get at that root cause of why students are absent. So data visualizations are really helpful when it comes to looking at that quantitative data. And so these tools are very helpful in those timely discussions. So if you're like me, you may have worked in a school where data was housed in multiple systems. There were maybe in various documents or in different drives. And because of this, it's hard to get all of that data together and to access it when you need it. So what I'm going to show you today are some examples from EduClimber. You may use a different data visualization tool, which will enable you to complete this work. But looking at this data in this view that you're seeing here, you're looking at aggregate attendance data. And this automates into the EduClimber platform from a district student information system. And it automates on a daily basis. What you're seeing on the screen right now are two lines, and they visualize two different attendance rates. One in orange is that attendance rate that's provided by the student information system. And the other one in blue, that's the full day rate, which is the rate in which the student didn't have any attendance events affecting or impacting their learning, such as being tardy to class or leaving early from class. So attendance teams will analyze this quantitative data to identify patterns within every level of school, elementary, middle school, high school. And that analysis also includes at looking at specific schools and days of the week, as well as by month. So when teams are getting together and they're looking at all of this data at that aggregate level, they're asking some of the questions of which schools in our district have the highest level of chronic absenteeism. Let's look at each building. Is there chronic absenteeism higher in some buildings more than others? Are those absenteeism rates higher than our district's absenteeism rate? And which grade levels in our schools have the highest rates of absenteeism? And they may also ask, are there days or months that are more affected and impacted than others? So when we look at that then, the qualitative data, we may also want to think about taking action on why students are missing school, because this is really going to get at those needs. And this data is going to inform the development and the prevention of intervention strategies, and it'll allow you to allocate those resources that support student attendance. So let's pop back here and talk about identifying those attendance reasons. When we're identifying and analyzing those reasons at that universal level, it's really important that the data is intentional. Intentional with being accurate, accessible, and timely, as I mentioned. So as districts are making those decisions with their attendance, they're making them as part of their MTSS framework. And it's important that those data visualizations are comprehensive and understandable. So in the example that you're seeing here, the team is using this collection of attendance data at the middle school. And the team is evaluating attendance, the attendance rates of their students by grade, but you can also see that they're evaluating the data by month. They may also evaluate it by weekday, and they may look to evaluate their data also by the reason. And so when evaluating your universal practices, The attendance data teams may ask those questions of, well, do we have consistent attendance coding? Those methods that we use across the district. And is that consistent coding really being used in a way that is defining our students' absent reasons? As a district, we might also ask, are there any absent reasons that aren't clear or that aren't in our control to change? And then how are we also communicating the importance of attendance to all of our stakeholders and guardians? And how often are we sharing that? Is this message routinely shared throughout the school year? So these aligned practices, they're going to better inform the attendance teams as they determine the strategies used to support their students and families. So I'm going to pass it back to Sarah, and she's going to share some methods for supporting your universal attendance needs.
Thanks, Kelly. I think some of those big pieces that you just mentioned around being able to code data and having similar ways that you're reporting the data, either across buildings or across classrooms and grade levels within your building, is really important to consider as you're thinking about using these data to then impact the tier 1 prevention and intervention that we're doing as part of the work. So once you review your attendance data from a tier 1 lens, you can start to think about how to impact overall attendance. And especially when we have a large percentage of students who are absent often, with those 2 or more absences a month, tier 1 is really where it's at for making big impacts. So it's where you want to hang. I'm laughing a little bit because that's, I say that knowing that I'm a little biased. I wrote a book about tier 1, but it truly is, because it's where we have the most resources within our schools and where we have the biggest potential to impact at a broad level, improving attendance overall. So then we can address and really make a big impact for students who are struggling to get to school to help them become more successful. So just as a reminder, when we think about tier 1, it's those preventative things that we're providing every classroom, every day to every student. And so those are the things that are focused on local context and needs, but that everybody gets access to. It's our prevention activities that we're doing. And within your own school, you can think about and consider, so within your data, which of the main causes of absenteeism that we see may be impacting your school more? Some of those qualitative data might really come in handy there. Some schools will also use other kind of secondary screeners. So they'll use their attendance data primarily to screen for risk of chronic absenteeism, but then they'll use a survey to look at students' attitudes toward attendance also, something like Renaissance Fundamentals, in order to identify specifically what might some of the causes of absentee be. And so then when we have a lot of absences, we can look to see, okay, which of these do we think might be most at play? Which are the biggest ones for our school? And then you can think about, as a tier 1, impacting those from a proactive measure. And let's talk about what some of those opportunities are. So some tier 1 preventative practices that we see when we think about barriers to attendance, when students struggle to attend because of this reason, schools are really looking at solutions related to transportation. So if this is a big issue in your district, then really focusing on transportation solutions might have a big impact. Some schools also, when there are barriers to attendance, offer free meals to get students to schools. There's lots of grants, and different states have different ways to do free meals for all. Other schools will focus with community organizations to offer telehealth services within the school. And then there are programs where there are lots of other programs related to tier 1 that you can do for all students. One of my favorite is a safer walk to school, where people are districts that do walking school buses or bicycle trains to really make a plan to support students to get to school who maybe live closer than bus routes go if you're in a more suburban or rural area, and a way to do it also within more urban areas as well too. But thinking about what that looks like, how to support students who have barriers to attendance that are really more around transportation or being able to get to school. Another common barrier is misconceptions about attendance. Some families and students don't understand that all absences count toward preventing toward risk, and the fact that coming to school every day is really important. And so making sure, as Kelly said, to really have very clear communication with families about the importance of attendance and what it means and why it's important to attend every day, and not just covering that in a handbook at a back to school night where parents are inundated with lots and lots of information, but throughout the year. So in the Midwest, letting parents know during fall allergy season, for instance, that they don't need to keep their children home for every sniffle that they have is a great way to remind them throughout the year and engage with families throughout the year about attendance expectations and what that means. Some students have developed an aversion to school because of absences and how those absences are treated over time. So ensuring that the school is a place that celebrates attendance and that encourages a really positive culture of attendance every day is really critical. So recognizing students not only for perfect attendance, which is something a lot of schools do, but also recognizing improved attendance can make a difference. And thinking intentionally about incentives is important. So all incentives don't necessarily work the same way. We really need to encourage the hard behavior, the specific behavior that we're looking for, not just perfect attendance. For some students, improved attendance might be getting to school on time or attending a specific class that they regularly skip. Maybe using data, we'll see that we have a large number of students who miss on Mondays in our school, and so we're really going to do something where we establish some sort of incentive on Mondays, some sort of exciting thing that students who attend on Mondays can get access to. Also recognizing that punishing lack of attendance many times results in students avoiding wanting to come to school because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble for missing school. And so that's the exact opposite thing that we want to promote, obviously. And so some schools, instead of late slips, provide welcome slips to avoid some of this. And then also just being really cognizant about and supporting the staff who are the first people that our students encounter when they come in through the door, whether that's late or tardy or whatever that is, making sure that those team members appreciate these same things and that culture of positivity around and celebrating attendance so that they're able to respond similarly to students when they come to school, and the first people they experience. And then finally, some students are, sometimes because of the pandemic, we've experienced more students being disengaged from school as a result of the pandemic. And so they've never really gotten re-engaged, right? And we know that there are several things we can do. Positive relationships has a very strong effect size in the literature. And so knowing that having positive relationships with students and every student knowing that they have an adult who cares about them at school is really important. And we can do that in multiple ways. So some teachers will greet students at the door, and that we know that is a very positive way. We meet people with their name. We have a smile on their face or welcome them to our classrooms. Many schools will also do a 2x10 where teachers will identify a student that we know either doesn't have strong relationships within the buildings or whom they just don't have a strong relationship with, and spend the next 10 school days, so 2 weeks of school, spending 2 minutes a day speaking to those students and really just forming relationships, not talking about what they've missed or what they're behind in, but really just getting to know them as people and showing them to build that relationship of caring. That's another evidence-based practice around building positive relationships. And again, for students who are disengaged, that little bump from an incentive that, again, is very intentional for that student and the specific behavior that we're looking for from that student related to attendance can also be helpful at improving attendance. So these are all ways that we can think about impacting Tier 1 to target local needs. And so we can be thinking about doing these and engaging with these for every student every day, and building and thinking about these are just things that we offer for all students to support those things. And because there are so many things that we can do, really targeting through what you see as the biggest causes of absences within your building can be the most helpful as you're targeting Tier 1 preventative practices to focus on. So I am going to turn it back to you, Kelly, as we transition to Tiers 2 and 3.
Thank you. So districts that are being proactive and using the data to help inform their attendance strategies for those students that are at risk of or demonstrating chronic absenteeism, it's effective when they use these targeted data practices. So let's talk about those. The first one that we're going to talk about is looking at identifying students that are at risk. Exploring those reasons is the second way. Exploring those reasons why those students are at risk. So looking at both of these targeted data practices is really an effective way to support at-risk and chronic absenteeism. So let's break these down a little bit. Let's talk about the first one, identifying students who are at risk. As you prepare for the upcoming year, there's going to be 3 cohorts you're going to really want to have your teams focus on to start helping you improve attendance for those students. So the first being, let's take a look at the prior year chronic absenteeism. It's really imperative to look back. Students who have missed 10% of the school year in that previous year really should be prioritized for that extra outreach and support during the summer as well as during the upcoming school year. So it's very timely. Right now, a lot of districts, they are finishing up their school years. And right now, teams are probably evaluating and strategizing, thinking about how they can enhance their MTSS practices. So this early identification and intervention with attendance during the summer months is really an effective practice for attendance data teams. The second practice that teams will find very effective as they get together and analyze their data would be looking at the attendance data within the first 2 weeks of a new school year. So it's at that time you want to start identifying those students who haven't shown up yet, because absenteeism in the first month of school can really predict poor attendance throughout the school year. According to the Baltimore Education Research Consortium, students who missed 2 to 4 days in September were 5 times more likely to be chronically absent than students who've missed fewer than 2 days. And then students who continued to miss school and missed more than 4 days were over 16 times as likely to be chronically absent than students who were absent fewer than 2 days. So really paying attention to that attendance during the first month is another strategy. Now, a third strategy to focus in on, that third group is, or that third factor, is really looking at that history of chronic absenteeism. So those that are missing 2 or more days within any month. Students who meet this criteria really should trigger a referral to your school's attendance team. So that attendance team can have eyes on any possible needs or future needs of that student. And so while the beginning of the year is really critical in laying that foundation, it's also really important to pay attention to attendance throughout the remainder of the year. So attendance risk, it can accumulate. And so it's really important then to be aware of all the potential risks and be in the know as that need grows. So when we talk about risk, there are risk guidelines. And when we talk about these risk indicators, I just want you to know that this is based on 180 school days. And what does that look like? So when we talk about a student that has a satisfactory rate of attendance, that really equates to them missing less than 5% of their school days, which is really less than 9 days of a full 180 school year. But then when we focus on the at-risk students, those students are at risk because they've missed about 5 to 10% of their school, which equals about 9 to 18 days. Then moving into the moderate and chronic category, these students have missed between that 10 to 20%, and then the severe chronic is missing more than 20%. So absenteeism is really considered severely chronic when that rate is above that 20%, and that's what districts are really trying to avoid. So let's look at this through, oops, I'm clicking too fast here, my apologies. Let's look at this through what it looks like in that MTSS framework. So a district can use those at-risk indicators to really supplement all of their practices that they are providing universally, like Sarah was explaining. But when we start to look at Tier 2, so let's focus in on that Tier 2, a district's targeted support really includes those resources that are designed to remove the barriers for attendance for students that have that heightened risk of chronic absenteeism. But we want to make sure that these students that have those 2 or more absences each month have those resources available to them. Keeping tabs on these students at risk with those proactive measures really are going to reduce the need of providing the intensive supports. So now those intensive supports, we want to provide for those students that are missing 20% or more of the school year. These resources really require a lot of individualization. They require case management to really customize the individual students' challenges. So when you're thinking about this within an MTSS framework, these resources at that tier 3 level really are more costly, and they rely on a lot of significant time spent by individuals to support their students. So as you're thinking about the effectiveness of your MTSS practices, ensuring that your tier 1 and your tier 2 really are evaluated often, so it will limit your supports that you are providing within that tier 3. So let's talk about looking at and evaluating your effectiveness of your attendance. And that's when you look at your data by month. As interventions and supports are implemented throughout the year, continually monitoring your student progress, you want to see, has the attendance improved? And looking at that data month over month holistically, has our attendance improved or has it worsened? So reviewing that data with your attendance strategy teams on a regular basis really ensures that your attendance practices that you've put in place has that positive impact. And you want to be able to really reflect them and adjust all those practices based off of the needs to really maximize effectiveness, because you're putting in a lot of time, you're putting a lot of investment into this. And so it's critical to know in a timely manner, are the practices that we have in place making a difference? So having that periodically review time of all of our data at an aggregate level is really essential, not only at the school and district level, but also it's essential to do at the student level. So let's talk about what that looks like at a student level. So having some method to monitor your data daily and weekly can really catch those students early before their absences accumulate. And having access to a platform that allows you to see that data just in time will allow you to then have that visibility of those students who are truly at risk. So what you're seeing here is this is a threshold feature in EduClimber, and it's an early warning system. It continuously monitors data within your platform. And so once your tiered thresholds for attendance are defined, or for any data for that matter, but today we're talking about attendance here. Once you have that data, those thresholds in metrics defined, then the threshold itself will notify users regularly and frequently to let school teams know, hey, these students, we need to take some action with them. And we want to be able to match then those students with the appropriate intervention. So with this threshold being set up, you can see here, I have that other little bubble that just popped up here. We have set up the metrics to look at those various categories, those risk indicators for students meeting the chronic absenteeism rates. And then that's the students that are meeting those criteria, then they can be tagged within the platform. And what that allows the end users to see is who are those students who are at risk, who are those students who are chronically absent, so that way we can take further action and put an intervention in place. Now, we talked about identifying those students at risk, but attendance strategy teams also would benefit from really exploring those barriers that Sarah was talking about to see what is getting in the way of their daily attendance. So teams can then determine what are the appropriate supports we should put in place based off of those causal factors. So using that right data can really pinpoint those barriers that the students and the families are experiencing. And it really can inform those interventions better and put in place the right type of intervention for the specific challenges. So I mentioned earlier, those having the right data for the attendance reasons can really support those decisions and inform the practices. So when you think about attendance reasons, like those that you may record in your student information systems, sometimes they may not be comprehensive enough. Think about the ones that you have in your system right now. Are they really getting at what those barriers could be and the reasons behind why a student is absent? So having that information about, okay, is the reason related to any of those barriers that Sarah just shared about aversion or disengagement? Are our reasons capturing that information? Might be something that your attendance strategy teams may want to think about. And they may also want to think about using other data sources to really support their work in this area. So when we talk about barriers to attendance, they may have a barrier despite their desire to be in school. So illness, family or home changes, or home challenges, there's trauma, lack of transportation, housing, inequitable access to services. All of these obstacles, they're physically preventing students from getting to school. And so they might require that coordination between home and school and community. So when you're focusing then on targeting those interventions, having that information available within your system or within a platform really helps your strategy team determine how can we support these students that are in need. So what you're seeing here is a visualization in EduClimber called Students 3D. And one function of this feature really provides the users the ability to determine if chronic absenteeism is impacting one subgroup more than the others. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a filtered view. And this filtered view is showing the attendance for a particular subgroup. So what we're seeing here is a grouping of students displaying the attendance rate between 50 to 90%. And this quick view is giving the strategy team a way to see that brief overview of who are our students that are chronically absent. Then we can also additionally, with just a click within this view our results by gender, by grade, by ethnicity. So whatever subcategory that meets what your students are comprised of, will have a greater understanding of the attendance issues and maybe the barriers that are affecting those students. So again, having the right information so you can really understand what barriers might be causing our students not to attend. So additionally, having that disengagement from school is another reason why students may be not coming to school. And as Sarah mentioned, having those strong reciprocal relationships with caring adults and educators really helps to keep kids in school. And that disengagement occurs when the instruction may seem irrelevant. There's poor relationships between student to student or students and staff, or maybe students are lacking that enrichment where they're just feeling like they're not being viewed for the type of student that they are. So a student's attitude towards attendance is really correlated with their future attendance. So when we look at those reasons for absenteeism, both the aversions and disengagements really relates to the students' attitudes about themselves as a learner, as well as how their attitudes are towards their school. So being proactive in monitoring these attitudes really can reduce any risk of truancy and help to keep those students monitored so they're not off track. And one way to do that is through an engagement survey. Using an engagement survey can really help uncover all of these non-academic barriers to a student's learning, such as lack of confidence, motivation, connectedness to school. Renaissance's Fundamentals, it's a quick and easy survey to administer to students and to respond, where students respond to statements about how they feel about school and themselves as learners. The survey takes about 15 minutes to give, and it's based off of the 9 factors that you see on the screen here, which are really focused on those higher categories of connectedness, self-efficacy, and motivation. And reading through those 9 factors, feelings about school, their perceived learning capability, their self-regard as a learner, their preparedness for learning, how they feel about teachers, their attitudes about teachers, and themselves, their general worth ethic, their confidence in their own learning, including their attitudes towards attending school and their response to the curriculum. How is the curriculum affecting them as a learner? So having that data from the survey, in addition to your attendance data, will really help teams to help uncover potential internal causes to chronic absenteeism and uncover students that are in need of support that might have fallen through the cracks otherwise. So what you're seeing in this visualization of EduClimber, you're able to see this data wall. And this data wall is part of that middle school collection that I was sharing with you earlier. At the top, what you can see is that we're looking at our sixth grade attendance data alongside the results of their fundamentals engagement survey in the areas of connectedness. So in the far left column, the students' names have been replaced by numbers. And the first two columns that you see there of colorful data, that's displaying their attendance rates. You're looking at the full day rate and the rate that is coming over from the student information system. So when we're looking at the following columns, then we're looking at those columns of data about their feelings about school, the attitudes towards teachers, and their attitudes about attendance. So now I'm going to hone in on a particular student here. Let's take a look at this student. We can see, based on their absenteeism rate, it's chronic. But now we can also see, with the engagement survey, we can see that they're also struggling. They're struggling to feel connected to school. Their scores are low, and so that might be a reason behind why they're not attending school. But now I'm going to click on another student and point out this student to you here. This second student doesn't have significant attendance issues at this moment in time, but we can see by their survey that might be an indicator for a future issue. So knowing that the student's thoughts ahead of time will help the teams focus in on those interventions that are really going to help the student address the student's needs. So as Sarah mentioned, aversion to school, they might be trying to avoid school maybe due to some academic difficulties and challenges that they're experiencing. And kids who often struggle to grasp that content, they do poorly on assessments or they're held back, they just feel like they don't have that support. And they just feel like they want to give up. So let's take a look at how you can do this by evaluating attendance alongside academics. So looking at that, what we're seeing here is to the right of the student's ID numbers, this data wall includes gender, ethnicity, you can see EL status, 504 status, and disability status. So these added columns of demographics adds that layer of really getting to understand that student as a learner and that student also as their background. So knowing that student's level of proficiency, their educational plans, that just helps to determine, are there other deficiencies that we need to, that are being addressed or maybe aren't being addressed. So when you're investigating chronic absenteeism, let's hone in on this student here, you can see that the student is really struggling to meet their benchmarks and their proficiency levels. And so then as educators, as your student act or your attendance action team gets together and looks at this data, you may want to then dive into the student's historical data. How is that student performing over time? Is this data representative of that student just this year? Or longitudinally, are we seeing a student really truly struggling? And students who struggle academically become more and more disengaged from school. It really becomes a snowball effect. It's becoming tougher. Why go to school? I can't go to school. If I'm going to miss school, then I'm going to miss more learning. And it really becomes difficult to support that struggling learner. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Brown, and she's going to share with us some tier 2 and 3 interventions to really support these students who are struggling.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, so let's jump right in. We are going to, when we think about matching, or when we think about tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, we do want to try to match interventions to the cause of the absences again that we're experiencing. It helps to have, when we think about tier 2 interventions, things that are right at our fingertips that we can implement almost immediately. So the attendance team meets, they identify students who are at risk of chronic absenteeism for the first time, and we want to get something in place. We want things that we can put in place just like that in order to move forward. So here are some examples of some of the things that schools do that do have a history of success. And so they have research behind them. So the first are letters home. So lots of schools use these. They can help when families have misconceptions about attendance and for students who are more disengaged. A good tip, and what we know from research, is that when we include the specific number of absences within a letter home, so we don't just say your child has, a lot of absences, please, we would like them to attend, we'd love to help you, right? Like we want to partner with you. That's one letter. Another letter would say your child has missed 14 days of school this year. And so we can come out and say specifically what's happened, or more than 2 days this month, like 3 days this month. That makes actually, it shows that it has a higher impact on attendance. So we want to be both positive and make it very clear that we want to partner. Check and Connect is a great intervention that can help when students are either have some aversion to school or disengagement from school. It provides individualized attention, which is really nice. And really, students are forming that relationship. It really helps that relationship component, but also gives them some motivation and some accountability for attending school every day because they're going to be checking in with someone. And then finally, having an attendance contract with students while we partner with some short-term mental health support. So some groups around attending school typically focused on reducing anxiety. We see that when students have an aversion to attending school, a lot of times that's anxiety-based. And so helping them build some of those routines to attend school around attendance, and then also having an attendance contract to help motivate and set some of that stage for accountability. And then when we think about tier 3 interventions, so students who need something more individualized and intensive, at that point, we really need to work with students individually. If what we've done isn't successful, we need to work individually with students and families to understand what really are the underlying reasons for students not attending, and then addressing those needs in particular, whether those, for some students, it's clothing and hygiene related needs. For other students, it's transportation and potentially other things like anxiety from an aversion point of view. Many schools also will partner with local agencies to help address some of those more complex needs that schools just aren't really set up to provide, and it's not really their purpose to provide, but that are really impacting student success within school. And then just an important note is that we always want to consider our data, always want to use our data to consider those specific needs. So talking with students and their families is a big source of information, but also getting information specifically about the types of things that we're seeing. Is a student always missing specific days of the week, for instance? We can drill into that when we see those things in our data to help find more specific information. And so as we conclude, as we plan to start, as you're thinking about closing out this year, as potentially starting to plan for next year, we really want to focus on getting every student to school every day. And using data can really help us proactively monitor attendance and support improving attendance for students, and to be able to use the resources within your entire school to help support that attendance and support teachers to be able to work with students on their attendance as well. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you receive some good reminders or ideas to use to support your important work. And I know we tried to save a few minutes at the end to answer your questions. And Daisy, Kelly, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that have come in the last hour.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. That was a great discussion. Lots of great examples and information. We do have some time for a couple questions. So you did talk about this, but one of the questions asked about many of my students, primarily middle and high school, are bright kids with high anxiety. We have attempted assigning them mentor and counselor check-ins, but getting them into school for this help continues to be difficult. Do you have any suggestions on additional strategies?
Yeah, great. I mean, I think this is something that's probably pretty common. So one, I think it's great that you have some things that you do right away. I do want to refer you to Check and Connect to see what that evidence-based strategy is. So if you do have mentors, check-ins, like you said, look to see what the research shows about the effect of that. I know Check and Connect is an effective evidence-based intervention. And so trying to pair that and see if you're kind of what you're currently doing is as robust as that might be one opportunity to just simply kind of intensify what you're currently offering. The other thing that I would say is when you see that it's not successful for individual students, then digging into individual reasons why. What are they anxious about? So I know, Brandy, at some schools, like I worked with with schools before where students are anxious because they know that when they miss school and they've missed for a while now potentially, that when they come back they're going to have all of these assignments and tests that they have to make up, and that becomes so anxiety producing that they're avoiding then going to school because of that. And so what are some of the things that we can do to remove some of those individual barriers or address those so that students don't have that anxiety for coming to school? And so really digging into what's the source of the anxiety. Why are they avoiding school? Is it a specific class? Is it a peer group? Like, what is that anxiety stemming from, so that you can address that specific barrier?
Great.
Kelly, do you have anything to add?
No, that was great, Sarah. Thanks.
Okay.
The next question, which may be our last question as we are coming close to the end, is similar. So many students, especially middle school and high school, are disengaged from school because traditional methods of instruction seem boring and irrelevant to their lives and culture. Do you have anything to help schools analyze this issue? And then part two is another big reason, which you had touched on, is the lack of personalization. So many U.S. Middle schools and high schools are too big. Teachers have too many student contacts to know them well, and moving from class to class for 7 periods a day are structural problems. Do you have any advice around this?
Kelly, I'm happy to start unless you'd like to.
Please start, Sarah. That sounds great.
Okay. I don't. Yeah. So I mean, those are big issues. One, in terms of the engagement piece, I think that's critical. We also know that students learn better when we're providing engaging instruction. I'm going to promote you to, or suggest to you, either Anita Archer or Kevin Feldman. So Anita Archer's work, she does have, it's primarily elementary based, but the principles apply to middle school and high school too. And so you have to do like some somersaults with it and like make it a fit and give the examples for secondary. Kevin Feldman is like is a secondary person. If you type in Kevin Feldman engagement strategies on the internet, you'll find YouTube videos and resources that he's provided. They define engagement as what students are saying, writing, or doing. And so when you think about engagement, it's not how interesting we are, if we're showing videos like what we're doing, but it's what we're having students do, what students are saying, writing, or doing. And so thinking about how we help teachers at the secondary level to make sure that all students do stay engaged all day throughout an entire class. So I'm doing very little lecture for a long period of time, right? But I might have students be writing a short answer to something and on their own, and then sharing it with a partner or talking to a partner about something that's very structured, right? And coming back. And so thinking about how we have students highly engaged in work throughout the day. So I think that's one piece. When you talk about personalization, I also think that obviously is super critical. I encourage you, in every state, it's different. I know I lived in Minnesota for a long time. I was a special ed director there. And we had lots of students who were attending community college, who were attending university classes during the day to be focused on things that were local to them. Obviously, trade programs a lot of times are partnering with schools. So finding out what's available in your state that your school can access to help support teaching students toward things that they see as relevant and what they're thinking about, focused on their career after school. I do think that that's absolutely critical. And I don't know if you're going to ask another question, but I did want to call out, I saw in the comments, or somebody mentioned in the comments or questions, I think it was Susan, said, I like how you're using an incentive for us to attend today, right? Like, all of us avoid things that are punishing. Students avoid school when it's punishing for them, whether that's anxiety, whatever that is, right? That they avoid it. We avoid things also sometimes that we don't think are going to be helpful. So I hope that you found this last hour helpful and informative, or reinforcing some of the things that you know. But I know also our generous hosts are also using an incentive for attendance today too, which I thought was clever. Thank you, Susan.
Well, on that note, thank you both, Sarah and Kelly, for the great discussion and for your insights on this very important topic. Before we leave, I just wanted to invite you to learn more about EduClimber Renaissance Fundamentals and our other MTSS solutions by either calling the number on your screen or visiting us online at renaissance.com. With that, I will hand the presentation over back to Scott.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks to Sarah, Kelly, and Daisy for just a great presentation and really great discussion there in the Q&A as well. It's such a critical topic. Appreciate all of your time today. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. The incentive that everybody's been talking about. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card is Tara Todd from North Carolina. So congratulations to Tara Todd. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I want to thank Renaissance for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions that really made this session go. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.